You're watching Access Minnesota. Here's Jim Dubois.
In 2006, the University of Minnesota refurbished an underutilized strip mall in North Minneapolis and opened the Urban Research Outreach Engagement Center, or Uroc. The building was designed to promote collaboration between the university and residents of the North Side to address the challenges facing the urban community. The redesigned building includes large open spaces and natural light, features meant to show Uroc's commitment to transparency and open dialogue with the neighborhood. Uroc houses many programs and initiatives meant to specifically address the needs of the Northside community, including a broadband access program, a business and technology center, an early education and development center, plus kitchen and gardening training to encourage healthy eating. Access spoke with one of Uroc's founders, Dr. Robert Jones, to learn more about its mission. Robert Jones is the Senior Vice President for System Academic Administration at the University of Minnesota. In 2006, Dr. Jones oversaw the creation of the university's Urban Outreach and Engagement Center, or Uroc for short. And Dr. Jones, welcome to Access Minnesota.
Thank you, Jim. It's a pleasure to be here.
Dr. Jones, give us a brief overview of the Uroc program and its impact in North Minneapolis.
Well, the University of Minnesota's Urban Research Outreach Engagement Center, affectionately known as Uroc, is a place where we decided that we needed to have a physical presence in this community in order to more effectively carry out our vision as an urban land-grant university. University of Minnesota is one of the probably only university with a land-grant mission that's located in the heart of an urban community. And so as we were going through our strategic planning process, we began to reflect on, what are the things that we would focus on to help us elevate ourselves to that lofty goal that we set of being one of the top 3 public research universities in the world. And we thought as part of that strategy, we needed to do more than just looking at the latest innovations in science and technology. Clearly, we wanted to be a leader in that regard. But it provided an opportunity for us to reflect on our vision and our responsibilities as an urban land-grant universities, something that we had not probably been as intentional and as strategic about in the past. And going forward, we decided we need to be very clear about our role in creating seamless partnerships with communities to solve some of the complex societal problems that exist and that are very prevalent in communities like North Minneapolis. So Uroc evolved out of our strategic planning and our vision to leverage our resources to be more effective, to be a more effective partner with community to solve complex problems.
What does the term land-grant university mean exactly?
Well, it's one of those terms that means probably something different to almost everyone you ask. The biggest misperception that land-grant universities were formed through a legislative act in 1862 with the goal of primarily just supporting agriculture and the mechanical arts. But it actually is deeper than that. The mission is to how do you leverage public dollars in a public education system and creating knowledge that will actually be translated into improving the lives of people in that community. So the land-grant mission was all about how do you create a public education system with the main goal of creating knowledge, training people for economic development, and creating knowledge to drive that economic development.
What have previous land-grant missions and programs done for the communities of Minnesota?
Well, the land-grant mission of the University of Minnesota as the state's land-grant institution has essentially transformed agriculture in this state. We're a leading agricultural producer. It's transformed the way that we leverage knowledge to the business community. The innovation that comes out of the university through our research and our scholarship is translated through our extension service, who takes that knowledge and then puts that knowledge in the hand of the common people, the people out there in the state who are out there driving economic development through the businesses that they start, the food that they produce, and all the entrepreneurial spirit that's out there. And so that's how the land-grant mission really comes into fruition through our educational programs, through our teaching programs, and our outreach and our engagement.
Why was the Northside neighborhood in particular selected for the Uroc program?
The North Side was selected because as we thought about our role and our obligation as an urban university, we're a research university. So part of our DNA is to test out new ideas and new ways of knowing and new ways of having impact. And so we felt that if we were going to try to perpetuate and support a strategy, a place-based strategy where a university decides that you can't resolve the problems and the challenges of a community by staying within the ivory towers. You have to have a physical presence in that community. We chose North Minneapolis because when you look at all of the variables and all the demographics that challenge urban communities around the country, North Minneapolis is a microcosm of a lot of those challenges in terms of, we all know, we hear a lot of talk about the achievement gap among African-American youth in general, and particularly African-American men in North Minneapolis is one of the highest in the U.S. There is a very high level of out-of-home placement in North Minneapolis. A substantial number of the youth that are in the foster care system in Hennepin County come from the 3 zip codes that constitute North Minneapolis. And I could go on and on. There are tremendous challenges in that community, but there are also tremendous assets. You have the Urban League, you have the North Point Health and Wellness Center, you have social service organizations, you've got churches and synagogues and art studios and parks and recreational facilities that are really world class.
Since its inception in 2006, what has Uroc accomplished on the North Side?
Well, Uroc has accomplished quite a bit. First of all, the physical presence and I think in the commitment of a large complex university like the University of Minnesota to have a desire to leverage its resources, to have a physical presence there, has leveraged a tremendous amount of goodwill in that community, because the university has been suspicious, that people have been suspicious of the university and its intentions in that community over time. So we had a lot of relationship rebuilding to do, and Uroc has helped facilitate that. But one of the things, some of the things that has been accomplished is I think we've created an environment where there's trust. People understand the value of partnership. They understand better, I think, how to leverage the universities to address some of the challenges in that community. I think we've clearly have brought resources into the community that otherwise the community wouldn't be available, it wouldn't have access to. For example, even before we actually opened the building, we leveraged a multi-million-dollar grant out of the Foundation for the Improvement of Post-Secondary Education to create a strategy of looking at educational pipeline issues, economic development issues, to use this grant to kind of help us create the model inside of Uroc. So that provided money for us to do things like youth gardening, to convene people around the value of food, and to raise issues about the educational pipeline, the achievement gap, and others. So it facilitated a lot of convening and dialogue around these critical issues. The same year that Uroc opened, we leveraged a $2.9 million grant out of the Department of Commerce as a part of the stimulus funds that were available to create, to develop and to expand 11 community-based computer labs, because we know the digital divide is one of those issues that really holds communities like North Minneapolis back, because people can't afford or don't have access to the internet, so they can't use it to facilitate job searches or to help their children with homework and all of these other very common kinds of technology issues now that most families have access to, that a lot of people in these kinds of communities across the 7-county metro really have limited access to. So we've been able to not only leverage the expansion of computer labs in North Minneapolis, but across the 7-county metro.
When Access Minnesota returns, more of our conversation with Dr. Robert Jones.
Access Minnesota will return after these messages.
Everyone, this is Crystal. Welcome, Crystal. When Crystal met Ryan, they were just kids, but she instantly...
You're watching Access Minnesota. Here's Jim Dubois.
Now more about the Uroc program from Dr. Robert Jones. You mentioned that initially there were some concerns about the university's true motivation in establishing Uroc. Do you still have issues with communication between the community and the university, or are those issues slowly being resolved?
You know, I've learned in my 33 years that one of the biggest misconceptions about communication is to assume that it has occurred. And so you can never communicate enough. And I think we have really been much more strategic. We have added resources in this office to work on strategic communication. And so we're working much more systematically to make sure that we are communicating well and communicating effectively with the different audiences in North Minneapolis. But there are, you know, occasionally a few gaps and breakdown in communication, misperception about our intentions versus what our actions are. And so I think in the long term, I think people will judge us not so much about what we say, but what we do and integrity about which we go about doing it.
As you look to the future of the Uroc program, where do you see it potentially expanding to in other urban areas in Minnesota?
Well, we first have to demonstrate capacity and impact of the current model. And so when we established this model, vetted this idea with the administration, vetted it through the Board of Regents, there was a very clear expectation from the president and from the board that we demonstrate impact. And so we have been developing over time the metrics and the benchmarks that will document the incremental and hopefully the long-term longitudinal impact of our presence in that community. What's different about the community? Have we achieved the goal of eradicating or on the path toward eradicating some of these social economic challenges in this community? Have we built greater capacity to access to the University of Minnesota? And so I think that would probably be what I see as the benefit from this. But we first have to document the fact that we're having an impact, and then think about what are the best practices, what are the lessons learned that we then could replicate in other communities. And so I couldn't, I won't say a specific community, but we already, even though the notion of Uroc was created around North Minneapolis, we are already structuring the work that we do that in a way that it can serve broader urban communities. We have programs in South Minneapolis and east side of St. Paul. And so even though it's kind of a place-based strategy, we clearly have a regional focus. And if this goes well over time, and once we demonstrate capacity and impact, you can certainly think about the need of having this kind of focus in some of the other large urban core areas like Duluth and Rochester, et cetera. But that's way out in the future. That's long beyond my tenure here at the University of Minnesota, because we've got a lot of work to do and a lot of communities to serve with the current structure, and we want to make sure that that's effective before we try to replicate it elsewhere.
Vice President Robert Jones, thank you so much for joining us on Access Minnesota.
My pleasure. Thank you for allowing me to be here.
That's all for this month's edition of Access Minnesota. Join us again next month. Thanks for watching.
Access Minnesota. Issues that matter to you. Join us again next week as we bring you the newsmakers and stories that shape our everyday lives. Access Minnesota is produced by the Minnesota Broadcasters Association in cooperation with the University of Minnesota's College of Liberal Arts.